Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock, and this is Let's Play Power Wash Simulator. Let's rant with Scrapper. We're working on the fire station. Yeah, I found out there's an achievement for this fire station where you have to clean the whole thing. I don't know if it's the whole thing or just this back tower back here. Let me show you. Without using this scaffold. So I'm going to do that last, and we'll see if I can figure out how to friggin' do that. I think you can use the ladder. So let's take a look at what it looks like if we put the ladder up against it. I don't think this ladder can go all the way to the top of it. Um, so I'm not sure how you get up there. Yeah, you can't even put the ladder against this thing at all. Um, you can go up the steps on the inside, but I don't know how you'd get the outside done. I don't know. So that's going to be interesting. I'm not going to do that probably in this episode. We'll do that in another episode. Um, we were working on the roof up here and the upper parts, and we're going to get those finished and then kind of move down into the lower area of the main um, section here. So, as we go, today we're going to let's rant, and because this subject has come up in on two different channels that I've been watching, we're going to go ahead and talk about it. The Arbiter of Worlds channel, Alex Macris, had a really cool video about why you shouldn't fudge the dice. And he sort of says you should never do it, and then he gives you two reasons why maybe you could. And then the basic expert, whose name is John, apparently made a tweet quite separate from this. I don't think he realized Macris had made this post because somebody mentioned it to him in the chat of the YouTube show, and I was watching actually when they did this, and he was like, "Oh, cool, we should have him on, right, and interview him about this." And so I think it just happened independently. Maybe something is going on in another part of the internet that I'm not aware of, and because there are lots of parts of the internet I'm not aware of, and that's why everybody's suddenly talking about fudging. Maybe it happened on one of the popular shows. Like, I don't really know. But what I want to do is sort of define what most people are talking about when they talk about fudging, and then kind of talk about how I think people aren't maybe thinking about this correctly. We'll see what you guys think, and then we'll talk about what Macros said and what Basic Expert and his friends said, and then we'll go from there. So first of all, what do they mean by fudging? What they mean is when the game master, when dice are rolled and the game master lies to the players about the die roll result, right? He tells them a different result. So let's say it's champions, and I tell the players that Firewing has a 12 or less to hit Equinox, and I know Equinox only has a few stun left, and if Firewing hits, it's going to probably knock Equinox out. Then I roll the dice. Remember, he had a 12 or less, right? And I roll a 9, and I say, miss. That's a lie, right? He actually hit based on the die rolls. Firewing hit Equinox. Whoops. And Equinox should have then had to take some damage, right? Or at least face damage rolls against his physical or energy, his, in this case, energy defense, right? But I edited the results of the die roll because I wanted to, prevent myself from causing Equinox to go unconscious or whatever, right? Now, fudging can happen in a lot of contexts. Maybe it's a skill check, and you say to Equinox's player, make a perception roll, because you want to see if he's going to find a clue, and Equinox's player fails the perception roll. And you say, well, you have a +3 on this. He didn't really have a +3, but you want him to find whatever this is, and so you allow it, right? That's fudging. And so fudging is usually defined as anytime the game master essentially uses subjectivity to alter the results of a die roll and to cause something other than the results that the die roll indicates to happen, right? The DM or the GM is overruling the dice, right? So we have to think about what are the dice doing, right? The dice represent an objective way of determining the outcome of an event whose outcome is in doubt, right? So in the first place, it has to be an outcome that is in doubt. It's something you're not sure what's going to happen. It's not a deterministic result, right? So this wouldn't be somebody jumps off who with no defenses jumps off a cliff and we don't know what happens. Yeah, they're going to die, right? So you don't roll dice for that, right? So this is what they're talking about, and the basic expert, I guess, caused a stir because on Twitter, where it's very easy to cause a stir, it seems like, he said that fudging die rolls like that is cheating, and he doesn't think you should do it. And so then there was this whole blow up because, a lot of people think the game master should fudge die rolls. And in fact, there are instructions, as Macris pointed out, which I wasn't paying a lot of attention to until he said it. There are actually instructions in the Dungeon Master's Guide of 5th edition D&D that tell you when and how to fudge and that you should do it. And it's one of your roles as a GM, and a good GM will fudge. And they tell you to fudge when the story calls for it and that sort of thing. And Macris says this is a terrible idea, and Basic Expert says it's cheating. And so, so are they right? Well, I would say kind of yes and kind of no. I've been doing this a lot lately. I think people take very extreme positions on these things when it's maybe not necessary to take such extreme positions. And I don't know if they do that to just gin up debate, and make it, clickbait, or if they're doing it because they really feel this way. Basic Expert seems to. So, let's see, what do we got here? All right. So what I want to do is sort of talk about what Macris says, and then we'll talk about what Basic Expert says, and then we'll kind of talk about like why I said it kind of depends. So let's start with Macris. Macris says you should basically never fudge the rolls on anything that's important, right? If it's combat, if it's determining whether a character lives or dies, yeah, it's just whatever the dice say is what happens, and that if you don't do that, you're kind of robbing the players essentially of agency, right? Because you're not allowing them to experience the consequences of their decisions and that sort of stuff. So he says you shouldn't fudge die rolls, and then he says, but there are a couple of cases where maybe you could, right? And so he gives two examples of when he thinks it's okay. One is if the outcome doesn't really matter, right? If it's a trivial type of a skill check that's not really going to affect combat, or whether a character lives or dies, or whether a merchant's going to sell you a cheap product, right? Then, you can maybe fudge the roll if it'll mean something funny is going to happen or whatever, and it's not really an important moment in the campaign. It's not determining something really important like whether your character is going to live, right? It's sort of something trivial. And he gives some examples, but I think you can imagine the sorts of things, right? Like they're in a room with a very trivial treasure, and you could fudge to let them get the treasure because maybe it's an item that would be funny for them to have, and it will, make the campaign a little more interesting or something. But it's not a critical item. It's not going to help them win against a dragon or anything like that. And so if it's not important, maybe, there's a monster. I think his example was there's a monster that only has 2 hit points left, and the guy who attacks it rolls and does only 1 hit point. and you just say, screw it, and you let him kill the monster because maybe, the battle's clearly over, the monster's not going to go again, 3 more PCs get to go before the monster does, so it's probably going to die, and is there any real value to keeping the combat going? Probably not. So as long as there's no real chance for the monster to actually do any damage, or that the battle could swing the other way, you may as well just let it go, right? So that's kind of one reason he says you could fudge, and he would find that acceptable. The second reason he said is if you have a random die roll, usually from like a random table or something like that, in which the result that you get with the die roll is illogical. So his example was, his example is, I keep forgetting I have the more powerful item now. Hang on. There we go. His example was you randomly roll on the random table a dragon lair 1,000 feet from a village, and he's like, well, how could the dragon lair be there and nobody knew about it? There are possible reasons why it might fit, but if you're doing something like this, doesn't really fit, and this probably shouldn't have happened this way. I actually don't like this decorative thing. I put the, hang on. Oh, here it is. I put the decorative thing on to get an achievement, but I don't really like it. And let me reduce to that. Okay, for now. So he argues that, like, if it would be a result that is logically inconsistent for the setting and would basically make a joke out of the setting or something, then you edit the die roll. You roll double zeros on the encounter. It wasn't really expected here, and you just change the encounter because it wouldn't make any sense. So he argues that the only 2 times that it's okay to fudge rolls of the die rolls is if you are either you come up with an illogical result that doesn't make any sense and would ruin the verisimilitude of the world, which is very important to me, right? Or if it's a result that wouldn't dramatically alter events in any major way, right? It's something trivial, so you can fudge it. I would argue if it's something trivial, what's the point of fudging it? But he sort of gives you the he gives you that one. Okay. Can we put bottles on this thing? I don't think we can. No. So let's switch to the other one, and then we can put a bottle and put the multi-purpose cleaner. Just clean this up. I think we have to go down to get the rest of the office wall, but I want to make sure it's cleaned up here. So that's Macris's take on it. So let me stop and look at my notes here. But one of the things... so then the next thing I want to talk about is Basic Expert's take. And his group, they argued it's cheating, and you basically should never do it, right? What the dice say is what the dice say, and you should just go with it. However, in the process of having this conversation, these people who were saying never ever fudge, one of them said, it's one of the guests, wasn't Basic Expert, but BE agreed with it, right? They said, well, that it's okay to fudge. How am I going to get up onto this thing? From here, I guess. It's okay to fudge. No, it's not okay to fudge the die rolls, right? But if you don't want to kill the characters, they said just make an easier encounter, right? Instead of having them fight like trolls, have them fight orcs. But here's my question. Isn't that also fudging? Is it really the case that fudging... I don't know how you get up here. That fudging is just about die rolls. Maybe I can grab the ladder from down here. Where did I put it? Is fudging just about die rolls? I would argue it's not, right? And so what I would argue is that both fudging and um, both fudging die rolls and deliberately making an easier encounter so you don't kill the characters, right? Whether you're like saying, I didn't roll that natural 20, I'm going to overrule it so I don't kill the ranger, or you say, I'm not going to put this monster in here because it might kill the ranger. In both cases, that's fudging, right? You made it easier, or at the table with a die roll, or you made it easier in prep by making an easier monster, right? Both of these are what I would call, and I think Matt Colville will call, acts of curation. And I've said this before, the dungeon master's job, the game master's job, is to curate the experience at the table for the group, for himself or herself, and for the players, right? The GM's job is one of curation. It's your job to curate the experience at the table. And so that everybody can enjoy the game. And so if that's true, and part of the curation involves deciding who they encounter, right? Like, you decide whether they fight a young dragon, an adult dragon, or an ancient dragon, right? And so if you put them up against an ancient dragon and you fudge the dice, is that a lot different from saying instead, I'm going to put them up against an adult dragon so I don't have to fudge the dice, right? Both of them are you deciding to go a little easier on the players, right? Either by putting an easier monster in, or by, making it so that the die rolls don't go against the players. So I would argue that both of these are acts of curation. That would be my argument, and that therefore there's not actually a lot of difference between whether you change the die rolls or whether you just make the encounter easier on the front end. To me, those are both similar outcomes, right? The outcome is the same for both. It's easier either way. And why did you make it easier? Well, because you judged in your subjective capacity as the game master that it would provide everyone, including you, with a better experience. Right? Not just because you want to go easier on them, but because for whatever reason, it will be a better experience. Maybe it's because you know there's another fight coming, and if you make this fight too hard, the next fight will be impossible, and so you curated it for that reason, right? Maybe there's some other reason you're doing it. But the point is, as a game master, you're the curator of the adventure, of the experience of the session. And as a GM, you do have not only the right, but the requirement of curating the experience for your fellow players and for yourself so that everybody has a good time, right? So I actually think that because you're a curator, fudging is part of the job. I don't think you should fudge the rolls to just make it so that characters don't die. That's not what I'm saying. And I don't think you should fudge the rolls for the rule of cool. You guys know I hate the rule of cool. But I do think that as a curation mechanism, fudging is one of the tools that game masters have. And I think if the Dungeon Master's Guide had been more about that, right, instead of saying what they said, which was something like that you should fudge to get the story outcome that you want, right? That's railroading. That's not what I'm talking about. If they had just said, look, fudging is one of the tools at your disposal and you should use it when you think it's necessary, I would have no problem with, kind of what they said, right? The whole idea behind fudging is that that the dice sometimes will give a result that's just going to kind of suck. Not because the players lose, that's not what we're talking about, but for other reasons. For example, boredom, right? So there were definitely times. Oh, I should switch to the other thing. There were definitely times with my players when I knew that a specific one result would be more boring than another. Right? If this continues, it's going to be boring. So you have to stop it. You can't let boredom happen when you have an opportunity to prevent it. Right? There are lots of times when something can happen that would be boring to the players. And so, yeah, that's not going to be fun for anybody, you or anybody else. So then you have to do something about it, right? You don't just let everyone be bored. That's not your job as a GM, right? So let me give you some examples. For example, so I would say the number one reason when it's okay to fudge is to avoid boredom, tedium, or the lack of fun at the table. So, for example, and Matt Colville has a video talking about this, there are many circumstances in D&D in which battles become absolutely boring, just horrible. And usually this happens, and Matt talks about this, there's a point, because D&D has hit points, and because the hit points, you don't. It's not like Savage Worlds where you have a death spiral, and as you take wounds, you get worse at things. In D&D, you're fine until the hit points go to 0, and you can only take somebody out when you take out all their hit points, right? There's a point in most D&D battles at which everyone, players, GM, characters, and NPCs, knows the battle is over, that the players are going to win. But there's still a whole bunch of hit points that have to be dealt to the monsters to take them out. And at that point, it becomes boring, right? Because who wants to just sit there in a slog that's like you already won, right? That's not interesting. That's not fun. That's boring. And so if you're in a circumstance in which the battle is clearly already over, right? This blow didn't kill the monster. Maybe the next blow won't kill the monster, but the third one will, and the monster can't do any damage to the players. It's already been established that the monster is, not able to defeat them. At that point, you might just say, okay, this blow killed him, even though he's still got 17 hit points left, because it's just not worth it. Right? The battle is boring now, and we're not here to be bored. Okay? So I think that's a great example. Another example would be, and I've had this happen a couple of times, where I know that the damage roll I just did is going to completely take a character out of the battle at the start of the fight. Right now, Macros would do this because this is important. It's not a irrelevant or non-trivial or a trivial result. It's going to change the whole nature of the fight, and the character should be taken out of it. Okay. But if you do that, the player of that character is going to be bored. And not for a little while, but for half a session or something while this big long battle goes on. That's not going to be any fun for that person. As a GM and as the curator, I think it's okay to say, all right, I'm going to do damage. I'll drop them to 5 stun or 2 hit points or whatever, but I'm not going to take them completely out, because if I do that, this player will be bored out of their mind because they'll have nothing to do for the next hour and a half while they watch everyone else at the table having fun, right? You don't want to make the experience miserable for the players, right? Now, I think a lot about champions when I think of these things, as you guys know. And of course, in champions, generally characters aren't dying, right? So it's just that the character gets knocked out. So you're not saving a character's life. You're just basically preventing the player from being bored. And you can always have a villain take this character out in another hit later in the battle, right? If you feel like, okay, it's time for them to go down, right? Just have the next villain attack him or whatever. So, Oh, I'm using the wrong power washer, but okay. We want glass. So yeah, I would say it's okay to fudge rolls in favor of the players, like damage rolls or whatever. It's okay to do that if doing that is going to stop a long period of boredom from happening. And I've done this once or twice where I just do a huge hit on the first round of combat, and it's like, okay, I know this person's supposed to be taken out here, but like my group, for example, we meet once every 2 weeks if we're lucky. We play for 3 hours. We usually only have one fight, one combat in a session, and it's going to be fairly long. It's going to be an hour and a half, probably to end the session, right? The climax of the session. And, so we're playing from 11 to 2, and the battle starts at like 12:40, and this player is going to be taken out at 12:45 and just have to sit there and watch till 2 o'clock. That's not enjoyable. So I think, as a curator, I might fudge that. The other thing I would say to avoid boredom, right, is if you this needs to be metal cleaner. Just hang on a sec. There we go. Is if you're making rolls on a random table, like a random encounter table to see like what monster shows up, and by luck the die rolls keep repeating, and so you just get 1d8 kobolds over and over again. That's super boring. Who wants to fight 1d8 kobolds multiple times over and over again in a wilderness adventure or something, or in a dungeon? Like, yeah, I know the dice say that that's who you're supposed to encounter, but that's super boring to do the same encounter over and over again. You got this whole encounter table filled with 20 or 30 possible encounters, and you're just going to keep running the same one over and over again. I'm overruling the dice on that, and I feel no remorse. I would say somebody who wouldn't overrule the dice on that is objectively a bad game master, because who wants to just keep fighting the same encounter over and over again? The only exception I would say is if your players are enjoying it, right? If they say, we love fighting kobolds, give us more, then okay, you can do it. But if you're just going to bore everybody again at the table with the same stupid encounter over and over again, just because you keep rolling, you rolled 3 12s in a row with your D20 on the encounter chart, that's just stupid. Give them a different encounter, re-roll the die, right? Pick something different. I mean, even in Ironsworn, right, which again, you're supposed to be following the dice for the story and everything, do what the dice say, play to see what happens. Sean suggests in the book, Rules as written, that if you get an illogical result, or a result that doesn't work for you narratively on a table, right, that you should consider reversing, since he's doing D100, reverse the dice, right? Like, so you roll a 12, change it to a 21, and see if you get a better result. And then you're still using the die roll. You still got a 2 and a 1 on the 2d10, right? You're just putting the 1 and the 2 in different positions and getting a slightly better result. It's still a random one, but it's a curated random one. It's one that makes a little bit more sense for whatever the circumstance is, right? So, again, I would say to avoid monotony, boredom, repetition, something like that, whether it's the boredom of having to finish off a monster that's clearly been defeated, or the boredom that happens when you're sitting there watching a whole battle while your friends are having fun and you don't get to have any fun, or whether it's the boredom of the same encounter over and over and over again, right? I would say any of these things are reasons, good, valid reasons to fudge a die roll. Because as Matt Colville talks about, right, what we're looking for in a role-playing game is drama and excitement, but the dice are incapable of providing that because the dice are not sentient, and they're just providing random rolls. The other reason I would say that you can and should potentially fudge die rolls is when the die roll would, as Macro says, wouldn't make a lot of difference, and the difference between one result and another would have fun or dramatic or enjoyable effects. So one of the examples used in the basic expert that they grumbled about was somebody said, well, what if the PC has a vendetta against the boss, right, that they're fighting, right? And he rolls damage and does, like, the boss has 10 hit points left and the PC does 9. And it would be so much more epic and fun and dramatic for everyone at the table if Superman beat Lex Luthor instead of Batman. Right? Yeah, Batman goes next, and he can do that last one stun to Lex Luthor, but Lex Luthor is Superman's enemy. And it would be a lot more fun and enjoyable and narratively satisfying if Superman beat Lex instead of Batman. Now, what the basic expert guys did was they immediately poo-pooed the concept of the archvillain and the narrative, and kind of said, well, you shouldn't be having stuff like that happen in your game because there shouldn't be archvillains. That, as a Champions player, yes, there should be. And almost all Champions characters have hunteds and archvillains. And are we doing metal? Yeah, we are. And it's perfectly okay, and in fact very desirable in Champions to have that. So I don't see that as an issue. And I think that there are plenty of times when it would simply be more enjoyable or fun for everyone at the table, including the GM, to have something like that happen. And so I don't object to that. I think it's perfectly fine that if, look, Luthor's going down anyway. Superman missed taking him out by one stun. Yeah, I'm just going to let Superman do it. He's Superman's archenemy. Okay, so I think in a case like that, I would allow it. Or the reverse, maybe. The NPC hireling goes first and does just enough damage to take out the bad guy. I'm probably going to leave the bad guy up and let one of the PCs finish him off. Unless the bad guy goes first and that could alter the outcome. If it's not really going to alter the outcome, right? NPC, I don't know who. The Flash is an NPC run by the GM, right? And he actually does enough damage to take out Luthor, but Superman and Batman and Wonder Woman, who are PCs, are all going next before Luthor gets to go. I'm going to probably say, Luthor staggers but doesn't go down, right? Because the Flash is an NPC, and I don't want to give the glory to the NPCs. I want to give it to the player characters. And then I would just leave it to Superman, Batman, or Wonder Woman to finish off the villain instead of the NPC, who the Flash is, right? So I think that that's another good reason to fudge. My point here is this. The outcome would be the same either way. Luthor's going down, whether you have the NPC take him out or you wait and let either Batman, Superman, or Wonder Woman take him out. Luthor's going down, whether Superman takes him out in the first example or Batman does, right? The difference... No, I want... Whoops, I didn't want that. Oh, so this does have a bottle on it. Huh. The difference is just in the dramatic effect and is not in the mechanical outcome. The mechanical outcome is going to be the same either way. Right? So as long as it's not going to really make a difference one way or the other, whether the Flash is the one who does the finishing blow on Lex Luthor or Superman or whatever, mechanically it doesn't matter. He's going to be beat either way. Then you can just go ahead and fudge a little bit, and I don't think anybody will care. right? And so I think that those are examples when I would say fudging is perfectly fine, and I would probably do it. Now, I want to be clear here. I'm not talking about the rule of cool. Yes, it would be cooler if Superman, rather than Wonder Woman, takes out Lex Luthor. That's true. But, and this is very, very important, Lex Luthor's going down either way. And all we're doing is just having it happen one phase later or something without any difference to the outcome. The rule of cool isn't about that. The rule of cool is about causing an outcome to happen that wouldn't, because it would be cooler, right? So Lex Luthor is invulnerable to Superman's attack, but you let it work anyway because Superman just made a cool speech, and it would be cooler if Superman defeated Lex Luthor after doing that speech, right? We want metal cleaner. There we go. And that's the garage door. So I'm not talking about rule of cool, but what I am talking about is when the outcome is going to happen anyway, and this version of it would be a little cooler than that version, then yeah, I think it's fine. Okay. So anyway, that's my take on fudging. I'm not as strict about it as others. Like, I generally don't fudge. I was saying to this one friend of mine, I only fudged like twice in the entire Rome game. It was fairly early on, and it was both times it was with the new person who'd never played D&D before, and once it was very early on in an early battle, in the early third level or so, and a lucky hit would have taken her out of the fight, and I didn't want to do that at the very beginning because it's boring to just sit there and make death saves in D&D and not be able to do anything. And so I just changed the ridiculously abnormally high result. I think it was like 2d8 damage, and I rolled double 8s. I just changed it to the average result, which would be a 10 instead of 16, and she survived, right? She didn't go down, and that allowed her to be present for the rest of the battle and have fun, right? And yeah, it changed the outcome of the battle a little bit, but why wouldn't you do that? To me, why wouldn't you do that if it's going to be more enjoyable for the player? And so, like, again, I'm not saying you don't kill a character that deserves to die or any of that. I roll in front of the players in my Deadlands game, so there's no fudging possible. But, and so, if you want a really serious deadly game, then you don't fudge at all. But when you have a brand new player and a brand new campaign and they've never played the game before and they haven't made any mistakes or done anything wrong, it's just bad luck on the die rolls, yeah, I can see fudging it so that they don't just have to sit there and do nothing for an entire session. So anyway, that's my take on fudging. You guys let me know what you think. We're about 50% of the way done with this firehouse. We got a long way to go. So there'll probably be a couple more rants using it. I may clean the rest of this building without you guys. We'll see. It just gave me a new job, so let's take a look at that. It just gave me a new job, just a unicycle. That's not going to take much. I do like to sometimes clean and listen to stuff, so I'm on YouTube. So I may do the rest of this firehouse without you guys, but I'm going to let you guys see me try to do that part, the drill tower, because we're going to see if we can figure out how to do that and get the achievement, like without using the scaffolding. So we'll see what happens. Until next time, guys, I am Scrapper Lock, and this has been Let's Rant with Scrapper using Power Wash Simulator.